You're listening to The Visibility Advantage, the podcast for senior leaders and business owners who want to build strategic presence in a world being reshaped by AI. I'm your host, Lynette Johnston, a LinkedIn and AI visibility specialist and author. I'm here to help you become as visible as you are valuable. Let's get into it. There's a mistake we make when we think about visibility. We tend to notice the outcome, the invitation to speak at an event, an inquiry from a prospective client, the recommendation, the introduction to someone worth knowing, the approach about a new role, and increasingly, perhaps, the discovery that someone found you because they asked an AI tool who they should be talking to. What we don't see nearly as clearly are all the things that happened before that moment. The profile someone looked at 6 months ago, the article they read, the comment they noticed, the podcast they heard you on, the recommendation someone else gave you, the second, third, or fourth time your name appeared in connection with the same subject. None of those encounters may have resulted in anything at the time, but they weren't necessarily wasted because visibility can accumulate. And that's what we're talking about in this episode of the Visibility Advantage podcast. If you've listened to previous episodes, you'll know that we've looked in detail at the first 3 pillars of our linkability blueprint: discovery, perception, and connection. Discovery is about whether the right people can find you, including people who don't yet know your name but are looking for the expertise you have. Perception is about what they understand about you once they find you. Does your visible presence accurately communicate who you are, what you know, and why that matters? Connection takes us beyond simply being seen. It's about developing the professional relationships from which conversations, introductions, recommendations, and opportunities can grow. But none of those is particularly powerful as a one-off exercise. You can optimize your LinkedIn profile and improve your discovery. You can make sure that what people see creates the right perception. You can build a valuable network and develop strong connections. But then what? Do you leave the profile untouched for another 3 years? Do you connect with people and never speak to them again? Do you publish 3 posts, decide the reach wasn't good enough, and disappear? Or does everything you do begin to build on what came before? That's momentum. I describe momentum as the compounding effect that sustains visibility over time. And there's an important distinction here. Momentum is not the same as frequency. It isn't a demand to post every day. It isn't about producing content simply because Tuesday has come around again and your content calendar says you need a post. And it isn't about chasing impressions or trying to make sure your face appears permanently in everybody's LinkedIn feed. You can be extremely active and build very little momentum. You can post constantly about unrelated subjects, jump onto every trending topic, and accumulate thousands of impressions without giving anybody a particularly clear idea of what you actually know. That's activity. Momentum is what accumulates because of the activity. Or to put it another way, frequency is how often you appear. Momentum is what accumulates because you appeared. And momentum isn't confined to LinkedIn. Your website contributes to it. So do articles, podcasts, videos, presentations, and media appearances. It grows when you're interviewed by someone else, recommended by a client, or included in a professional conversation. An idea might start with a LinkedIn post. You develop it further into an article. Someone invites you onto the podcast to discuss it. A person listening to that podcast mentions your name to someone else. 6 months later, somebody asks an AI tool to recommend people with expertise in that particular field, and there are now multiple pieces of evidence connecting your name with it. No single piece has had to establish your authority on its own. They reinforce one another. That's why another way I think about momentum is as continuity of meaning rather than simply continuity of activity. You don't need to keep saying exactly the same thing. You don't need to become repetitive. And you certainly don't need to become a content machine. But there does need to be enough coherence for people to begin understanding what to associate with you. Over time, that can start building four things: recognition, association, corroboration, and authority. Because instead of asking whether your latest post performed well, we can start asking a much bigger question. Is everything you're doing making it easier for the right people, and increasingly the systems are using, to find, understand, trust, and remember you? That's the real purpose of momentum. So, if momentum is so valuable, why is it so difficult to maintain? Usually, it's not because people don't understand that visibility matters. It's because visibility is very easy to deprioritize. When work gets busy, LinkedIn slips down the list. When you've won the client, the pressure to keep marketing yourself disappears. When you've landed the role you wanted, keeping your professional presence current suddenly seems less important. And when you don't need anything from your network right now, maintaining those relationships can feel like something that can wait. Until, of course, you do need them. This is one of the reasons I encourage people to stop thinking about visibility as a campaign. A campaign has a beginning and an end. You become more active because you're looking for a role. You start posting because you're launching something. You update your profile because you're about to approach potential clients. There's nothing wrong with any of those activities. The problem is starting from a standing position every time you need visibility to produce something for you. Because momentum takes time to build. You can't decide on Monday that you want to be recognized as an authority in a particular area and expect the evidence to be there by Friday. You can't neglect your professional network for 5 years and suddenly expect everyone in it to become an advocate because you're looking for a new role. And you can't create a LinkedIn profile, leave it untouched for years, and assume it will continue representing the person you've subsequently become. Your expertise evolves, your career evolves, your business evolves, the market around you evolves, and increasingly, the way people discover and evaluate you evolves too. So, your visible presence needs to keep moving with all of that. Another problem I see frequently is what I call stop start visibility. Someone decides they're going to take LinkedIn seriously. They update their profile. They post several times. They comment enthusiastically. They send connection requests. They might even keep it going for a month or two. And then something happens. Often nothing dramatic at all. They get busy. They don't know what to write about next. The posts aren't getting the reach they expected. Nobody has contacted them with an exciting opportunity. And they gradually disappear. 3 months later, they decide to start again. The problem isn't simply that they've stopped posting, it's that they've interrupted the accumulation of signals. People who are beginning to recognize their name stop seeing it. Conversations aren't continued. Ideas that could have developed into something distinctive are abandoned. And the evidence connecting that person with their area of expertise stops growing. They haven't necessarily gone all the way back to zero, but they've made the job considerably harder for themselves. I think another reason momentum breaks down is that we're encouraged to evaluate visibility activity far too quickly. We publish a post, and within hours, we're looking at the impression. We compare this week's reach with last week's. We decide whether something has worked according to the number of reactions or comments it received. But some of the most valuable outcomes from visibility are almost impossible to attribute that neatly. Someone may have been reading your posts for a year without ever reacting to one. Someone else may hear your name from a colleague, look at your LinkedIn profile, and encounter you again 6 months later. A prospective client might read an article today and contact you next year. An AI system may draw on a collection of signals that you've been building for years. Which one of those activities gets the credit when the opportunity finally arrives? Probably none of them individually. That's the point. One post equals one inquiry is not how this works. Every useful, relevant, and coherent piece of evidence has the potential to strengthen what already exists. That's where the compounding happens. And sustaining that momentum does not mean sustaining maximum effort. A sustainable visibility strategy has to fit around the work that gives you something worth being visible for in the first place. Sometimes you'll do more, sometimes you'll do less, but you don't disappear altogether, because the objective isn't to win LinkedIn this week. It's to make sure that when the right opportunity appears, next week, next month, or next year, you haven't made yourself unnecessarily difficult to find. So if momentum isn't simply about doing more, what exactly are we building? I think there are 4 things happening over time: recognition, association, corroboration, and authority. They build on one another. Recognition is the simplest. Someone encounters your name. Perhaps they see a post you've written. Perhaps you comment on a post they've seen. They hear you on a podcast, attend a presentation you've given, or come across your LinkedIn profile. At that stage, you may be nothing more than vaguely familiar. Then they encounter you again and again. Eventually, you're no longer a stranger, and that's recognition. But recognition on its own isn't particularly useful. Being known isn't the same as being known for something, and that's where association comes in. Over time, people begin connecting your name with particular subjects, ideas, or areas of expertise. If I say someone's name to you and you immediately think, oh yes, she's the person who knows about X, an association has formed. That's enormously valuable, because it means that when somebody encounters a problem or an opportunity connected with X, you have a chance of entering their mind or being mentioned in the conversation. Then we get to corroboration, because it's one thing for me to tell you I'm an expert in something. It's much more powerful when the evidence around me supports that claim. Perhaps you find articles I've written about it. You see that I've been invited to speak about it. Other people recommend me for it. I'm interviewed about it. Clients talk about the results of working with me. My website says one thing, and my LinkedIn presence supports it. Other people's references to me support it. The evidence begins agreeing with itself. And when enough of that happens, we start moving towards authority. Not because you've declared yourself an authority, but because there's a body of evidence from which other people can reasonably reach that conclusion. For most of our careers, we've thought about professional visibility in human terms. Who knows me? Who remembers me? Who might recommend me? All those questions still matter enormously. But increasingly, there's another audience interpreting the evidence we leave behind: machines. Search engines have been doing this for years, of course, but generative AI has changed the experience for the person doing the searching. People no longer necessarily begin by typing your name into Google. They may not know your name. Instead, they can describe the person they're looking for. Who could speak at our conference about this? Who has expertise in that? Who could advise us on this particular problem? Who are the specialists in this field? And the AI system has to work out who might be a credible answer. That changes the visibility question. It's no longer only, can someone find me if they know my name? It's increasingly, can they find me if they know what they need but don't know who I am? And that brings us straight back to momentum. Because the clearer and more consistent the evidence around you is, the more material there is from which both people and machines can understand what you do. I had a rather wonderful demonstration of this very recently. Last week I noticed that somebody had looked at my LinkedIn profile. I didn't recognize her name, so I sent her a connection request. She accepted, and when we started talking, I discovered that she was organizing a conference and looking for someone who could present at it and potentially run a workshop for members of her association. Naturally, I wanted to know how she found me. She had asked AI. But what made this particularly interesting was that she hadn't asked just once, got my name and stopped there. She'd reconfigured the question several times, and each time I came up top of the list. And that's the bit that interests me, because there isn't a button I can press that says, put Lanier at the top of an AI recommendation. I couldn't have known that she was going to conduct that search. I didn't know what the wording was she would use. I didn't even know she existed. What I could do, and what I have been doing over a long period, was create evidence. My LinkedIn presence, my website, articles, podcast episodes, videos, interviews, presentations, other people's references to my work, years of material that collectively says something about what I know and what I do. Then, when this particular person needed somebody with that expertise, the evidence was already there. AI provided the discovery. She then went to LinkedIn and looked at my profile. That gave her another opportunity to evaluate me. I noticed her visit and made the connection. We had a conversation. And the outcome of that is I now have 2 workshops booked with her for October. That's a commercial outcome from visibility. But it would be very difficult for me to point to one LinkedIn post, one article, or one podcast episode and say, that did it. The opportunity came from the accumulation, and that's momentum. Now let me contrast that with another situation. A client came to me because he wanted access to his LinkedIn company page. He'd been running his business for more than 2 decades and wanted to establish a more professional presence on LinkedIn to match what his competitors were doing. His own profile was very poor, and the company page was consequently difficult to gain access to. Eventually, he decided he would do the work himself, so he had a coaching session in which I gave him what he needed to get started. And since then, nothing. No meaningful changes to his profile, no changes to the company page, not even some of the absolute basics, such as adding banners. His personal profile has had 5 profile views in the past 90 days and appeared in 11 searches. His company page has 11 followers. Now, those numbers aren't the problem in themselves, they're symptoms of the problem. After more than 20 years in business, there's very little visible evidence of that business on LinkedIn. He has the expertise, he has the experience, he has the business. And now he also has the professional advice about what he could do to improve his presence. What he doesn't yet have is momentum. And paying for advice doesn't create it. Acting on that advice does. It's only been a fortnight since our training session, so there's still every opportunity for him to get started. But this is exactly how visibility gets postponed. I'll do it when things quieten down. I'll sort out the profile later. I'll start posting when I've got something to say. I'll deal with the company page next month. And the longer something remains undone, the easier it becomes to leave it undone. Meanwhile, another year passes, another potential client searches, another person compares suppliers, another AI system goes looking for evidence. And what does it find? Perhaps very little. That's why I don't think longevity itself creates momentum. You can have 20 years of expertise and very little visibility. Equally, you can have built a substantial body of visible evidence over time that continues working when you're not actively looking for an opportunity. Time doesn't create momentum. Consistent visible action over time does. In one case, the opportunity arrived and the evidence was already waiting for it. In the other, the expertise is there, but much of the evidence still isn't. This brings us to something important about the linkability blueprint. Momentum may be the fourth pillar, but it isn't simply the fourth thing you do. You don't complete discovery, move on to perception, finish connection, and then start momentum. Momentum is what keeps the other three working. Discovery requires maintenance because your expertise develops, your services change, and the ways in which people search for you change. Perception requires maintenance because your visible presence needs to keep representing who you are now rather than who you were several years ago. And connection requires momentum because a LinkedIn connection is simply the technical beginning of a relationship. The value comes from what happens afterwards. Do you stay in touch? Do you contribute to their conversations? Do you introduce people when there's a value in doing so? Do you become someone they remember? That's momentum applied to connection. And suddenly the four pillars stop looking like separate activities. They become a system. Now, at this point, you may be thinking this sounds like an awful lot of work, but you don't need to do everything. You need to do enough of the right things consistently enough for them to reinforce one another. That will look different for different people. If you're a strong writer, written content may carry much of the load. If you're an excellent speaker, presentations, podcasts, and videos may give you much more leverage. If your work is highly relationship driven, thoughtful networking and conversations may matter more than publishing several times a week. And you don't necessarily need to create something new every time. One substantial idea can travel. A presentation can become an article. An article can become several LinkedIn posts. A podcast can become a blog post. A question from a client can reveal something worth talking about publicly. The objective isn't constant production, it's continued evidence. So rather than asking, how much should I be doing? I think a better question is, what can I realistically keep doing? Because a modest visibility rhythm maintained for 2 years is likely to build considerably more momentum than an ambitious strategy abandoned after 2 months. There are 4 ideas worth keeping in view. First, keep your professional presence current. Don't wait until you're looking for a new job, a board role, clients, or speaking opportunities before discovering that your visible presence is 3 years out of date. Second, keep contributing evidence. That could be posts, articles, comments, presentations, podcast appearances, video, or case studies. Not noise, evidence. Things that reinforce what you know and what you want to be associated with. Third, keep your relationships alive. You don't need to contact hundreds of people, but don't confuse having a large network with having strong connections. And fourth, pay attention to what is accumulating. Every so often, stand back and look at the whole picture. If someone discovered you today, what would they find? What would they conclude you're particularly good at? Would there be recent evidence? Would other sources support what you say about yourself? And perhaps the most interesting question of all is someone who'd never heard of you asked an AI system to recommend someone with your expertise. Is there enough evidence for you to be part of the answer? You can't control that answer, but you can influence the evidence from which it is constructed. Update the profile when something meaningful changes. Capture the client result. Publish the useful idea. Comment when you genuinely have something to contribute. Stay in touch with the person you met 6 months ago. Accept the podcast invitation. None of those things necessarily feel significant on its own, but momentum isn't created by one enormous visibility event. It's created when other useful actions stop being isolated events and begin reinforcing one another. That's when visibility stops becoming something you occasionally work on and becomes part of how you operate professionally. There's one final idea I want to return to because it's at the heart of momentum: compounding. We're familiar with the concept when it comes to money. Professional visibility can work in a similar way. The article you write becomes part of your body of work. The relationship you develop becomes part of your network. The presentation you give becomes part of your expertise. The recommendation somebody writes becomes third-party validation. The case study becomes proof that you've actually done what you say you can do. And those things can begin reinforcing one another. Someone discovers you through a post and checks your profile. Your profile leads them to your website. They find a case study and perhaps a podcast interview. They notice other people talking about you in connection with the same area of expertise. Each additional piece reduces the reliance on any single claim you make about yourself. That's the compounding effect we're looking for. I'd also be very wary of measuring momentum solely through LinkedIn statistics. Of course, I look at them. Profile views matter, search appearances matter, follower growth and content performance can tell us useful things. But they're indicators, not the objective. If a post receives 5,000 impressions but does nothing to strengthen what you're known for, I'm not sure I'd call that successful momentum. Conversely, a post seen by 500 of the right people might lead to a conversation, reinforce your expertise with an existing contact, or give someone another reason to remember you. And you may never know. A great deal of visibility happens beyond our ability to measure it. We don't know every time somebody mentions our name in a meeting. We don't know when someone sends our profile to a colleague. And we don't know every time someone reads something we've written without even reacting to it. And we certainly don't know every occasion on which an AI system considers the evidence associated with our name. So measure what you can, but don't mistake what you can measure for everything that matters. There is one qualification to all of this. Momentum is only useful if it's taking you somewhere you actually want to go. You can spend years building visibility around something you no longer want to be known for. You can become strongly associated with expertise that belong to an earlier stage of your career. This is why the 4 pillars need to work together. Discovery asks whether the right people can find you. Perception asks whether what they find creates the right understanding. Connection asks whether you're developing the relationships that matter. And momentum asks whether you're continuing to reinforce all of that over time. Momentum without direction is simply movement. But momentum applied to the other 3 pillars is what allows visibility to compound. We've now reached the end of our journey through the 4 pillars of the linkability blueprint: discovery, perception, connection, and momentum. They aren't 4 LinkedIn tactics, they're a way of thinking about professional visibility. Can you be found? When you're found, is the right impression created? Are you developing relationships rather than simply collecting an audience? And are you doing enough, consistently enough, of all of that work to accumulate? Because visibility isn't something you finish. There isn't a point where you can say, "Excellent, I'm visible now." That's done. Careers change, businesses change, markets change, technology changes, the people you need to reach change. And the ways in which they discover you are changing very quickly indeed. The objective isn't to spend your life working on your visibility. Quite the opposite. It's to build a way of maintaining it that becomes part of how you operate professionally. So I'll leave you with one question. If the right opportunity appeared tomorrow, a role, a client, a board appointment, a speaking invitation, a partnership, or something you haven't even thought of yet, would the evidence already exist for someone to find you, understand you, and feel confident choosing you? If the answer is yes, that's momentum at work. And if the answer is no, you don't need to do everything tomorrow. You just need to start giving the future something to build on. That's it for this episode of the Visibility Advantage podcast. If today's conversation resonated with you, I'd love it if you shared it with a colleague. If you're ready to understand exactly where your own visibility stands, our linkability blueprint is a great first step. You'll find the details in the show notes. And if you haven't already, hit follow or subscribe wherever you're listening so you don't miss the next episode. I'll see you again soon. Bye for now.